Hello and welcome to this edition of the France 24 interview. Today our guest is Omar Robert Hamilton. Hello, you have just written a book about the Egyptian revolution. It's just been published in France. You are Egyptian and British by your father, and you have lived through this revolution. And in this book, what's quite impressive is the fact that it's like being there. It's very vibrant, very colorful, very impressive. As a read, it's very compelling because it gives you this impression of being there. I suppose that was one of your objectives?
Yes, absolutely. It's nice that you think it works like that. I had worked as a filmmaker pretty much for the last 10 years before I began writing this book. And when the point came at which I sort of was sat down to try and work out what I wanted to sort of write the history of the revolution somehow. And I think, the reason that it came out as a novel is for exactly that reason, that you can kind of create that psychological intimacy and also that psychological progression as we move from the earlier years of the revolution, 2011, until the counter-revolution and the sort of the collapse of politics in Egypt at that point.
How much of this book is actually your own personal story?
I mean, my personal story is certainly in there. Almost all of my personal experiences are somehow in that book, but I've also kind of widened it out. I've tried to include other perspectives and other experiences to sort of bolster my own. But certainly the core of it is quite close to my own life.
So basically you have lived through the scenes that you depict in this book, most of them.
Most of them, yeah.
It is quite a violent book. I mean, in it you see, people protesting, you see death, you see violence. Was it important for you to depict the actual violence that took place back then?
It wasn't something that I actually realized I was doing as I was writing. And I think actually the full scale of the violence actually only really came home to me once other people started reading it and sort of being a bit shocked by how violent it was. When I was working, I was really just trying to recreate what had happened. And of course, what happened was very violent. And there was, time and time again, peaceful protesters went out really armed with nothing but rocks, and they were met with escalating violence that got worse and worse and worse through until the summer of 2013, when the Egyptian military kills 900 people in one day.
How do you feel about it all today? I mean, you say in this book that chaos, which in a way does resonate with what you created back then, which is Moserine, which was a network of information, was... in the book, you described chaos as the epicenter of the information war. Was this a big part of it at the end of the day?
Yes, I think so. I think in 2011, there was almost a global sense that the internet was kind of arriving at its full potential, in that with the spread of information was what was required for the kind of spread of justice, right? If we all knew that something wrong was happening, that injustice would then be corrected. And, if you remember, Egypt was the top hashtag of the year in 2011. I think there was really the sense that just transmitting information was what was sort of central to the struggle. And of course, that's also one of the things that has gone sour, not just in Egypt, but globally, this sense that information is at the core of what we need. The internet has become this actually very confusing, very dark place that's being used to disrupt our politics, that's making us unsure what our central shared reality even is. And that sort of souring of the idea of information, or the age of information, was felt very keenly in Egypt as well.
Back then, when this started, you dropped everything and joined the movement. Is that exactly what happened? Why was it so important to you back then?
I mean, I think it was clearly monumental as soon as it erupted. I mean, we knew from the second that January 25th started, and the way that it was being played out on television, that first of all, nobody expected this to happen, and that in an instant it was going to overturn decades of problematic narratives about the Arab world and about democracy's sort of impossibility in the Arab world. And I felt like this was somehow going to be the defining thing in my life. Well, this was the thing that my life up until that point, I was young still, but that was the thing I had been somehow waiting for. So I got on a plane and I got straight into it. And I think there was this sense that the twin pillars of colonialism and neoliberalism were going to be overturned by this movement, and that it was going to spread around the whole world, and it was going to be this epoch-making.
How do you feel about it all now? I mean, we have Egyptian elections coming. It does appear that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the current president, is going to be re-elected, since there really isn't any opposition. What's left of this revolution?
The revolution, in a way, as a political battle, in the moment the 2011 revolution is over, I think that human progress and human history is very long, and we don't know what effects it is going to have in 10, 20 years. I think the world is very clearly in a state of flux. We can feel that all over the world, that we are transitioning from something to something else. And I think that the revolutions around the Arab world were part of that. On a day-to-day level, you can almost feel the revolution in the strength of the counter-revolution. The government is displaying such total paranoia on every front, and they've invaded every aspect of civic and political and economic life and are looking to clamp down so entirely on life in Egypt that, it's clear that they are afraid of something.
Well, one aspect which is important also in your book is the martyrs, the people who died during this revolution, fighting. You talk a lot about their memory, about the people who were around them, the suffering. What's left of that today?
I think the martyrs, they still exist in the kind of iconography or the cultural memory of the revolution and of the people in the country who define themselves as having been revolutionists or been part of that movement. And I think they must somehow continue as some kind of fuel or momentum or obligation that we all continue to have to the people who paid the maximum price. That, however difficult things are, you can't just sort of say, well, that's over and forget about it and move on with your life.
One thing also you talk about a lot in that book is the battle for Maspero, and that is the public Egyptian television building. And there was indeed a very bloody protest in front of it. And in this book, you often write that had Maspero been taken at that precise moment, between the moment basically the police stepped back and the army hadn't yet stepped in, things would have been different. Do you believe that?
I think there were several moments when history takes a turn or there's a fork in the road and it goes one way or another. I've often thought that is one of them. I think had the revolution taken over the apparatus of state television, it would have been a very, very powerful tool, because really from the minute that the country kind of reverted to some kind of normalcy, the messaging coming out from the government was propagandistic, it was xenophobic, it was undermining, it was created a sense of national paranoia that was very, very palpable. And Egypt is a country with a very strong state infrastructure for media, through radio, through television, through newspapers. It's very, very tightly controlled. And that is, for a lot of people, how you access reality, or reality that's far away from you. So, of course, if you can control that, it's a very powerful thing.
At the end of your book, your book is actually built in three parts for our viewers. You have today, you have tomorrow, today, and yesterday. Basically, in your book, tomorrow is the beginning, is the uprising. Yeah. Today actually covers the period where Mohamed Morsi was in power, and yesterday in your book is the moment. The current moment, in fact, today. So why that choice, and what's the underlying message, basically? That we've been backwards?
Yeah, well, every book, I guess, is a question of structure. And as you're writing, you're looking for a structure and something to help you organize what is almost an infinite amount of information or possible information into something that makes a sort of narrative shape. And yeah, so at the beginning, everything is to do with the future. Everything is to do with building a different tomorrow. It's optimistic. It's collective. And then by the end, in the book, it's more like it's constantly looking at the past and going over the actions and the different possible scenarios that could have played out and what mistakes were. And I think the central question that part of the book is about, and also that we carry around with us today, is, were you strong enough to change history and fail? Or were you never strong enough? In which case, if you weren't then, you never will be. And I think that's the central question that the book is trying to work out, and that perhaps I'm also is trying.
How do you feel about that question? Do you feel today that all this was, because the end of your book is slightly depressing. You do feel that everybody's gone back to kind of a form of previous life, which is not. Is that how you feel about it? That the momentum's been lost, but there is still simmering something?
The momentum has certainly been lost, but I think there's still a lot of people doing a lot of work. And in fact, the work that has to happen now, it's like, instead of the kind of revolution that we can see on television and in public spaces, actually the amount of work that has to happen supporting people in prison, or supporting the families of people who have been disappeared or that are on death row. And, the amount of work going into ameliorating the violence of the state wherever possible, it's more than you can even count. And so I don't know. I think the revolution I feel like there is almost a sense of hibernation right now, in that, you know, you have to kind of somehow close down and look after yourself to get through the winter, and hopefully the winter won't last too long.
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, this book has come out only a few days ago here in France. It's very interesting and compelling read, I have to say. I thought it was, you feel like you're there, so that is very interesting. Thank you very much for speaking to us and giving us your point of view about the state of the Egyptian revolution here on France 24. And well, thanks to you for watching. You can find this program on france24.com.